All right, so yep, my name is Evan Norman. I'm a Big Sky Watershed Corps member. I work for CFWEP. The Watershed Corps program is an AmeriCorps program, so it's a service program. And generally it's 1 year, but I signed on for my second year this last January. So I've been kind of working and doing all the fun stuff that CFWEP's been up to for the past 2 years. You heard Chris Doyle talk a couple weeks ago, and then Abby Peltema will be back in a couple weeks. She'll kind of round out our CFWEP presentations for the semester, but you guys are lucky you're hearing 3 of us kind of talk about what we do and what are the projects we're involved in. So it's pretty exciting that we get this publicity, because normally we're kind of on the like, well, it's CFWEP, that's hard to pronounce, I don't know what you guys do. So it's cool that we get students and professionals knowledgeable about what we're up to. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about a little bit of our watershed background. I'm going to talk about restoration techniques with Beaver Mimicry. I'm going to go over quick monitoring preliminary results, and then more project opportunities and outreach, and how we can kind of evolve this and bring it into other watersheds in different areas. So historically, Butte, this is down by Montana Street here, and we have Blacktail Creek and historic Silver Bow Creek channel, has had wetlands and ponds in it. So back in the day when they started turning on the pumps and so they could access the ore body that was underneath the ground, that dewatered a lot of this area. And so historically we've had ponds that have been reminiscent of beavers and wetlands that have kind of provided those services of trapping sediments and nutrients in our area. But ever since the turning on of the pumps for the Kelly and all the underground mines that are attached to it, we've kind of not seen this anymore. And of course our channels are kind of diminished. I like to show this picture kind of to start off. This is more of our watershed background. And so these are climate models and climate projections into the future. So you can see over here I have a little graph. These are representative concentration pathways. So you have an RCP of 8.5, which is kind of like the most extreme, or you have an RCP of 4.5. And these are just carbon dioxide concentrations. And so you can see that for 2040 to 2069, we have an average daily maximum temperature projection just over 4.5, between 4.5 and 5 degrees. And then if we were to take the most extreme circumstance, I guess, we'd have over a 6 for the near future. And then at the end of the century here, then we have a almost 10-degree increase. And so what we're going to be seeing is changes in temperature. And so I guess it's kind of our job to come up with ways that we can kind of buffer those temperature changes, and so we don't have it affecting our environments as much. Here's a picture, if you can see it in the back. I had this on my newsletter, my paper that was sent out, that Dr. Powell sent out. But it shows historic Beaver Dam complexes in the Blacktail drainage. And so all these lines here are beaver dams that were once in the area. And then you can see there's still a pond here that's supported by a beaver dam. And in the middle of that pond, there's a channel that flows out. So water flows in, and then it flows out. But the rest of these are pretty dry for most of the year, especially late in the summer. And then when I was out there, I snapped a picture of one of the rocks. So this is our just native rock outcrops, granitic. And you can see where the water was just based off how the rock is looking. So this is about 2.5 to 3 feet right here. And you can see some people in the background just behind an old beaver dam complex which is there. So if you could imagine this rock right here, this whole area was once full of water to a depth of about 2.5 feet. So pretty interesting that you can go out there and see that evidence. And it's definitely not, it's easy to understand that, wow, water was really this deep and there was an abundance of beavers in these areas. Here's another graphic showing our snow water equivalent. So if you were to melt the amount of snow that was in a depth of water, then you would get a snow water equivalent, or SWE. And so this shows from March until June, the first of the month, from 1981 to 2017, the snow water equivalences at Basin Creek, so just south of town here. And you can see how this is definitely stands out the most. What month is this? This is June. So in the 80s, we used to have some water back then. We used to have some snow on that site. And then as we've gotten to the century here, 2005 and on, we've kind of had minimal years where we've actually had snowpack in June. You can see that 2011 year right here, and the 2012 big runoff year that we had. So that's from that. But generally, this is a strong decrease in snowpack. March, pretty straight across the board, not much correlation there. And then for May and April, you have a weak negative correlation between snowpack and also time of year. So it's just kind of a good overview of what we got going on, what's been changing in our watershed, what our snowpack's doing. We're definitely losing them earlier in the year. We're not having any in June like we were back 20, 30 years ago. So we have this transition of environments. So what we're seeing is a lot of depleted water tables, and so our areas and valleys that look like this, our water tables have been going down, and conifers have actually been starting to come in. And then I'm going to kind of jump down here to the bottom, but this is kind of evidence of a transition from our lowland area, which is traditionally like a riparian zone, to more upland area. So these conifers can access the water table at lower depths, and so they'll move down into the valleys and taking over these aspens that were normally once there that have been taken out. And I put this fire suppression on here because as aspens kind of disappear and they're not as around as much, fire suppression is definitely one of those big things that happens where aspens burn a lot easier than the conifers do, and they really rely, the regeneration of the aspen rely on fires, and so they can shoot back up. But if we have conifers in the area, they're not going to burn as much. So it's a fire suppression, and we've kind of seen it changing in an area. Here's a picture of an old beaver dam. This is on one of our sites. I just put this in here because it just shows kind of like the size of it and the depth. So we have a person here taking a topographic survey, but these guys are big. They're wide and they're also pretty tall. They're up to 5 feet tall. So these areas here, they had a lot of wood to work with. They had beavers that once lived in these areas, and so it's kind of neat to walk out there and kind of see the scope and the massiveness almost of what these old landscapes were like. So for this project, I'll go over our partners that are kind of working with us and helping with the Beaver Mimicry. The Clark Fork Watershed Education Program. I've got a couple more staff members in here. Our outreach and education is mostly a big part of this project, and then also we're a part of the monitoring as well. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is doing some monitoring for us, outreach, so they mostly look at the fisheries for us and how that's changing. Great West Engineering and Amy Chadwick, she's been an ecologist for working in the beaver mimicry and watershed restoration for quite some time now, so she's kind of like the lead head on this project. So if you guys have any more information or more questions, I can certainly pass you on to her. Buttes Over Bow, they're kind of granting us access to a lot of the sites, including the Basin Creek area and getting into that, and just kind of opening up the doors for us and just being an open source that we can access and talk to as we need. Watershed Restoration Coalition, they wrote the grant to the Wildlife Conservation Society for a climate change adaptation study. And so this grant was used to fund a lot of these partners in their role in this project. Water Environmental Technologies doing more monitoring for us. Forest Service, more access to these lands. Natural Resources Damage Program, and providing some of the restoration funds for both Blacktail and also Browns Gulch areas. And then Montana Tech, we've been working with them and the professors and getting the students out involved in this project as well. So let's get going here. What's a BDA or a BMT? There are more acronyms, great, we just got to add to the list. But Beaver Dam Analog or Beaver Mimicry Technique. So I like this picture here because it just kind of shows a general representation of what beaver mimicry is. And so you can see here that we have post lines that have been pounded into the stream, and then behind it we have willow and cobble mats that are down, and they kind of go down away. So if the flow is going this way, it goes with the flow, and then in the front, cobble, gravel, and sand is placed there. And there's some variations to this that I'll kind of talk about and what's worked well for us. But this is just the general idea that we have kind of a slowing of flow, and so that we have areas that can actually spread out horizontally with the water. And so you can see here's a project site. This is Browns Gulch. There's a beaver mimicry right there, and there's one right here. But these are those posts that I was talking about. And then these are kind of like the trees that you can almost cut up and then weave in between the posts, and that helps slow the water down. And these are somewhat permeable structures, and so they allow water to go through, and they're not completely damish, you know, they're not concrete. They allow water to go through pretty easy. And then up top here, there's another one, and they kind of support each other. That's why you put them together. So you have one that supports another, because if we were to have all this water pile up behind this one, it needs to have something either below it or above it to support the pressure of that water, especially on the bottom. This is a site that we actually just kind of fixed up not too long ago on blacktail. And so you can see here a little bit more of an extreme drop. And then we actually have, you can't really see it, but there's a channel that's flowing off to the side there. It creates kind of like a side channel habitat for lots of different creatures. Here's another picture of it, a little more extreme also. So this is our staff gauge, kind of the reading of the depth of the water. Right here, this is an existing beaver dam complex that's been abandoned. And then what we have right here is an area where we've chosen because the beaver dam helps to store that water. If it leaks, sometimes that's a problem. We'll try to find those leaks. And so we actually have a storage of water back here, a nice pond area. But you can see when they work in succession, if we were to have this weight of water on just one Beaver Mimicry dam, it would probably blow out. So that's why we put them together so they can kind of help each other. And then here's another picture. I didn't really think this was necessary, but I kind of liked what it looked like. And you can really see the depth of the water behind these guys. And so there isn't a whole lot to them. They're pretty straightforward, and like I said, they provide that habitat and that pool that fish and trout can look for. And definitely they make it through the entire year. They're not just a winter time thing. They're not just a spring. They're meant to last. And I can kind of talk about how they can work better over years. So what's the capacity of these? What kind of rivers and what kind of areas are we working in? So this is hydrographs based on just stream stats, so it's pretty general, but gives us a good idea of how much water is in the stream in these areas that we're working at. And so I have Basin, Blacktail, and Brown's Gulch. So our average monthly stream flows, we're not trying to dam the Clark Fork. We're working on small streams in small drainage areas. And so our Brown's Gulch area is about 5.5 square miles. That's what the area drains. Blacktail, just over 3. And then Basin Creek, we have some small sites. So, we can't really work in areas where there's a whole bunch of flow, just because that's not the capacity of some of these devices. But for the most part, if you have enough of these that work together, you can actually add up a good volume of water that's available later in the year. Here's a picture I just took on a hike, and I liked it because it showed kind of what a beaver dam can do. You see the extent of the water, the surface area of the water, and then also you can see the white spots, and that's the sediment that's kind of dug up, or that's kind of been pushed up against the dam that's there. And then some log jams down here that have kind of been formed too. So, just another way that beavers can impact an ecosystem. Andy had if you were at a talk earlier today, Andy had a really nice graphic that was similar to this and a little bit different, but I show this one just because it's a good general idea of what beaver dams do and what they're used for. So if you have an increase in beaver dams, the velocity slows down of a stream. Some of that sediment falls out that normally would be in there moving along, so that falls down in the stream bed. And you have an increase in floodplain connectivity, so if that sediment falls out, our water's going to be able to move in a different spot. So it's going to move out, move to the floodplain. And then from there, you're going to get a change in the antibranching or sinuosity. So that means that the river is moving into different areas, and it's not being in just one spot. So because the water's being moved out to different areas, our stream power width is going to go down. Our beaver dam failures is going to go down, and more beaver are going to go up. And then you can see there's some things that are intermixed in there, such as the water table increasing, riparian vegetation increasing, and then there's some other ones that beavers affect, but I like just this general one for all intensive purposes. Here is another variation of that last graphic, and it shows kind of the story of a stream over time. And so let's say you have an incising stream. What's going to happen is it's going to move down and then it's going to widen. So it's going to go side to side. And then you're going to get to that aggradation state where the water's slowing down, sediment's dropping out, and then you get back to this dynamic equilibrium. So a lot of our streams in this area are kind of stuck in this spot right now. But with Beaver Dam analogs, we can actually kind of just jump right to that dynamic equilibrium where we almost skip these steps that a whole Beaver Dam complex, that the whole natural system would go through. And with Beaver Dams and Beaver Dam analogs, we can almost jump straight from our incising to our dynamic equilibrium where we have a sinuous, floodplain active channels. They're not just one channel. So kind of an all-around healthy system that's not losing sediment, not gaining sediment. And this is all based on slope, velocity of the stream, sediment size, just to name a few. So what are the locations we choose? Some of those are based off of landowner involvement. And so Amy, who's been our project manager, she kind of started out this project going and knocking on landowner doors and asking them, well, what are their vision for the area that they live on, such as parcels of land just like this, and then also what would they like to see. And so that's been a big one, just them wanting us to do this beaver mimicry restoration on their land, and then also access permits. And so that speaks to any Forest Service land, any land that we're not allowed to go on, such as Basin Creek. We have an access permit for there to do monitoring and some restoration here in the upcoming future. Other factors that we look at, and these are kind of based off of a Big Hole Watershed Foundation. They did a beaver suitability study, and so they looked at these things and what beavers need to be back into an ecosystem. And so if we can build an ecosystem back up with the Beaver Dam analogs, then potentially the beavers can go in there. So we want to choose sites that beavers are also suitable for, and they can habitat. A lot of the sites that we have existing beaver dam complexes, and they've been abandoned or they've been trapped out, so they're not there anymore. But things we look for: stream gradient, 1 to 3% is ideal. Beavers build up to 16%, I've heard, but 1 to 3%, the lower the better. You want a good average valley width, so one that's not too small, so you have a good floodplain connectivity and ability to grow shrubs and things that beavers can eat and also use for their dams. Stream permanence, so how long the stream is around during the year. So is it only there during flow seasons, such as in the spring? Is it intermittent? Is it ephemeral? Things like that. Canopy cover, what's showing up over the stream, so how much is the stream protected? Woody vegetation, so that's talking about our alders, conifers, aspen, willows. How much are they around the stream, and how much can we grow them back into an area? And then lastly, wetland and riparian area. So what's already existing, what's there, and how can we improve it? So if we have an area that already has an established wetland and riparian area, then that might not be our choice to try to do restoration on. We'll try to look for something that needs a little bit more help, and then we can also see that in our monitoring data a little bit better, just kind of the improvements of the ecosystem. So the big question is, well, why don't we just bring beavers back in an area? I know that's probably going to be a conversation at the end. We have this beaver mimicry. Well, why not beavers? Well, a couple things. Lengthy. It's just a lengthy process. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. So there's comment periods for the public. You have to go through environmental assessments that kind of analyze how a beaver might impact in a location. When with that, you can't control where they move. So if you put them back in one spot, they won't always be there. Sometimes they can cause infrastructure problems near houses and culverts. So they dam up that water, and they can cause a lot of the erosion, sediment that flows in and around those culverts. And then lastly, private land. So you need permits to trap, but if you're on private land, then you have to ask the landowner's permission to trap on their land. And so that's not a bad idea, is to introduce them on private land if you don't want them to be exterminated, because you need to get someone's okay to get that taken care of. And then I put these two pictures in here because these are good, just best management practices for controlling beaver and controlling like what they might do to an area. So you can see here we have a beaver deceiver that's working around a culvert, and so beavers can't get right up to it, and the culvert can still act as it needs to and drain. And then just some fencing around some woody vegetation so they don't take them down. So some things you can do to mitigate what a beaver might do. So we're out there monitoring. We're doing a lot of monitoring and a lot of different aspects of what we're doing to the area and how restoration is actually happening. One thing we're doing is we're taking surface water measurements, and so we're just going out there with flow meters and we're measuring how much water is in the stream. So just volume per time, how much is moving through. And then at the same time while we're doing that, we're taking staff gauge readings, so we're seeing the depth of the water at that time. Another thing that we're doing is we're taking piezometer measurements, and so you can see here we have a set of piezometers that are installed. And these are just PVC pipes that go straight down into the ground and meet that water table. And then what we do is we just have a measuring tape. We put it down there. It has a little node on the end, I guess. And then once it hits water, it sets a switch off, sets a circuit off, and then it beeps at you. And so it tells you, okay, stop. What's your reading on the tape measure? So it's just literally depth to water for these guys. And you can see here, this is kind of an example of what we're doing. We're taking flows up and down, and then we might have a piezometer nest in between. So that kind of tracks how our groundwater is moving and the depth of the groundwater across our sites. Topographic surveys, we've been surveyed, and so this is a survey, just elevation profile all the way across. As you can see, you can just go out there with the survey equipment and take care of that. But this is for kind of later use for groundwater modeling, and then also to see how sediment changes in the stream as you install more beaver mimicry, and how sediment actually builds up behind some of these devices. Water temperature and depth. We have continuous water temperature and depth sounders out there. And so these guys are going to kind of help us determine how our groundwater and our surface water is interacting. So if we have more groundwater coming into the system, we might have colder temperatures. And then if we have losing, then we might have warmer temperatures, ones that just reflect what the stream would normally be. So you can see here, we would either have a losing stream or a gaining stream. We can kind of try to defer or understand how that's happening based on our temperatures. And then continuous pressure transducers are also installed in these guys, and so we'll actually put these in the stream, and they'll help us understand the depth of the water, which is that stage that I was talking about. And then also, once you have that stage, we'll try to determine a stage rating curve with our flow. And so if we know the depth of the water over time, we might be able to determine, okay, well, how does flow change with depth, and then how does that change with groundwater, how are those all interacting? So it's a system that we're all trying to figure out based on, you know, surface water all the way up to the water temperature and the depths. Some fencing. This is a Brown Gulch site. So this is an exciting one because I went out there and I was like, whoa, that's a fence and a half right there. So this is to keep the cattle out and also to kind of control some of the erosion that happens on the stream banks. And I think that I have someone in the room who could probably speak a little bit more to this at the end, and I'd love to hear that. But when I went out there, it was quite the barrier, and so kind of helps protect some of that woody vegetation that needs to take hold in the stream bank. And then this is another site on Upper Blacktail. This is just traditional fencing around some vegetation. This is to see changes in how, if we affect the water table, how much does the vegetation actually grow? Because when it's on the outside, it's being chewed down by the ungulates in the area. So when it's in the stream, or when it's in the fence, it's protected, and so we can actually see that change as we go and we improve that water table, hopefully. Other things we're up to, photo points, just taking pictures of how the environment's changing and how our area is looking different over time, and that's including sediment buildup and things like that. Fisheries monitoring, I mentioned FWP's getting out there and doing a lot of that. So Jason Lindstrom, he's been integral in kind of our blacktail sites and also our upcoming basin sites too. And then lastly, we want to look at the bugs in the stream, so just how the insects are changing based on whether we have more of a flow a river system, like a small stream, or if we have a pond. These macroinvertebrates will kind of reflect that. So preliminary results and conclusions. I just have a couple here. This product's relatively new, so we don't have a whole lot to share yet, but hopefully in the future we'll get some good information, and there's a lot to grow on here. But overall flows are difficult to understand. We haven't quite nailed that down. We've seen really small streams up there, so it's been hard to measure flows, especially late in the season. Measuring a 0.2 CFS is nothing really that's exciting. And also is not very reliable when you're using a Marsh McBurney or something that normally requires quite a bit of flow to pick up. Temperature and pressure transducers, they're out there right now. They're measuring once an hour, and so we'll probably wait quite some time before we go and actually pick those up. But their battery life's up to 5 years, and so we can leave those out there for a long time, but we'll probably collect here, I'd assume next fall after our restoration's done, and check to see how those have changed over time. Another one here, groundwater showing more water in treatment sites and then less dry wells in August. And so those are for the treatment sites. Our wells actually have water in them, while our control sites have dry wells and less overall water during the same period. So this is just on the same reach within 100 feet. We're just seeing more water in the wells that have been treated next to the beaver dams that have been treated versus the control sites upstream, which have not been treated. Fisheries, I was actually out there at a site on Saturday. I was showing somebody around and just kind of talking about some stuff, and we went in there, and yeah, sure enough, there was a bunch of fish, and so that was really exciting to see. If you build it, they will come. Same with beavers. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, fish will come, and they'll find good habitat to live in. So there's been 2 to 3 times or more fish in different restored locations, and that's talking about populations of like 4 to 8 or like 4 to 12. And so we're not talking about really highly populated areas with fish, but there's some in there, so that's definitely a good sign. And then lastly, landowner testimonies of water late in the year. People have been saying that they've been curious about this beaver mimicry, and they said, okay, let's do it. And then just this last fall, there's been water in culverts that landowners normally wouldn't say is there. And so it's been exciting to hear them believe in these type of restoration projects and restoration ideas. And so they can they can use them on their land, and it actually shows and kind of does something to water, and ends up in culverts when you wouldn't expect it. Some adding to sites, willow saplings. So you could put vegetation that's you can add to the vegetation that's already there to kind of give it a helping hand. And so you can see well-established willows in the back, and then kind of just start seedlings in the front there, just behind the Beaver Mimicry Dam there. So that's something you can do. Some lessons learned. I might take a little while on this slide, but we'll see. Sedge sod. That first slide that I hadn't mentioned sedge sod. This is pretty much mud. So these are almost variations of earthen dams. Beavers build earthen dams. They take mud, they take sticks, they take everything, and they shove it in the stream, and so it stops flowing. And so that's kind of what we were doing. We learned that if you put this on the bottom of some of these devices, they can help with that incision and that underscour that happens when the flows are really high, and so that you're not losing a lot of that material. It stays in place, and so big sedge sod mats really help out. Boulders, another good thing to kind of stabilize that beaver mimicry so it doesn't get blown out during high flows. You can put those in. Those can cause some problems though. You can get water sneaking in between them, and so better be dang sure that those are in place and they're not going to get swept out during high flows. Sediment delivery, that's actually sometimes a good thing on some of our sites. When we put these in, there isn't a whole lot around them. And so as sediment comes down, it builds up on the dam and almost kind of hides it. And so it gives it a good ability for water to just naturally move through and also above it, and then down off the beaver dam. And then speaking of litter is really important to slow down those flows, especially when you're coming down off the device on the downstream end of what you're trying to block up and what you're trying to slow down. So this litter, not even too much at all. You just need to put a couple little sticks, some dead leaves and things like that. That really helps slow the flow down, and so you're not having that underscour like I'd mentioned. the ramping up and ramping down. If you have a beaver dam and it just goes straight up, straight down, you're going to have a lot of problems, especially on the downstream end. So it's important that you slowly bring it up and then slowly bring it down. And that just helps slow the flow down, and so you're not having a lot of that water take away what you've put in place. And then waders. This is kind of a funny one because you go out there at the beginning of the day and you're like, oh yeah, hip boots are fine, I just need my boots. And then water gets up and up and up, and you've raised it up a foot and you haven't even realized it. You step in there and your boots are all filled up. So just going out there with waders, more is better. More than you need is definitely a good thing for these type of projects. And then monitoring, collecting stream flows. I'd mentioned that stream flows at really low velocities are hard to gather, and they're kind of hard to correlate between restored and treatment sites and control sites as well. So we're trying to come up with different ways to do that, and salt dilution testing is one of them, putting slugs of rhodamine in the stream and seeing how that changes, concentrations of salt. Good way to tell stream flow. Piezometer placement, another one. Some of our sites have really nice piezometer placements where they're in a grid, like that one picture that I showed, and other ones are just all over the place. We have 15 that are 5 here, 3 there, 4 there, and that's great for monitoring and for being able to model that in the future. But when you're actually out there, you actually lose kind of some of the locations of where they're at, and you're like, well, why are these over here when we could have just put them in a row, put them in a row, put them in a row? So that's another one that I definitely try to do differently, or try to organize more efficiently. And also some of the piezometers are so far away from the stream, they're almost in the uplands where they're not reflective of some of that surface water changes in that groundwater system. And then teamwork, just going out there with a couple people, it just makes it go faster. And I've definitely been lucky to work with a graduate student who kind of, I don't know, he wasn't as interested in this as he was in teaching, go figure, but teaching's a lot of fun. I like it a lot too. But he went on that route, and so I hope to pick up some of this work and pick up some of the things that we can do on this project. So product opportunities, like I said, if I were to pick this up, soils. So we want to kind of figure out the connectivity. How do the soils transport water? Is it taking a really long time, or is it just allowing the water to go straight through? So where we build these dams, it's important to understand our system and how much it can actually store water and how slow it's moving through the watershed. Nutrients, another one. Joe Griffin had talked last week kind of about how flows, when they're lower, kind of produce cleaner environments, but when they're higher, they pick up a lot of the stuff that's in the stream bank and the metals and things like that. So how does that impact, and how does that change as we change both the water in the stream and then the water in the groundwater? Watershed expansion, of course, just kind of putting this in more drainages and more areas. So we want to just grow it and make it a little more well-known and out there so people understand it. And then lastly, ongoing maintenance and monitoring. So we'll just keep going to these sites, keep checking them out, making sure they're doing their jobs and they're not getting washed away. Some student involvement and education that we've been up to. We took out the Montana Tech hydrogeology camp this summer. And so they went out there, checked out the sites, and kind of did some monitoring with us. So that was really exciting to get some of their input, get some of their ideas. Dr. Glenn Shaw has been also a big part of this project and kind of getting our monitoring on its feet and getting going. And then the Butte High Career Center, I was out here with my coworker just a couple weeks ago. We introduced this product to them, and in this picture they're actually looking at the macroinvertebrates on Blacktail in town, and then also on Blacktail off Roosevelt Drive. But ideally what would happen is that the Career Center could work with us on monitoring and doing a citizen science so they can help us do the monitoring, especially with the bugs and things that really fit their interests and their needs. So it's been fun to work with both these groups, and we hope to do that more in the future. Some education and reminders, so ways that we've been getting this information out to people: radio, newspaper, online sources, presentations. And then I just threw this in here, never underestimate the basics. You may think that you know everything when you go out into a work environment and you're like, yeah, I'm caught up to speed, but pictures GPS, knowing where your sites are, site notes, data sharing, data backup, and then also visiting your site frequently are all super important things, and super important things that I've been reminded of just by being a part of this project, and things that I was practicing before, but now I realize how important it is to keep up with some of these basics. Here's a kind of a new way, in an interesting way, that we've kind of been sharing some of the information about this project. So this is ARC Story Maps. It's a way to interactively share some information. And so if you guys have any more questions or want to look up more information about these projects or beaver dams, cfwep.org/beaver. And that's kind of what's going on here. So you can choose different tabs, and then there's different layouts based on just kind of how I set it up. So you can see here we have a project background, watershed geography, restoration methods, monitoring, resources. And so if you guys want to check out papers that are related to this, this is a good website to kind of go to and kind of look at. But kind of fun, and I've definitely had a good time setting it up, and I'm always tweaking it a little bit and changing information and adding more as I learn more too. So it's a fun thing to go to. So check it out if you have time. And then lastly, I have a couple more pictures here, but this is a Basin Creek project site, June 14th, 2017. Just notice the tree there, and then there's an old Beaver Dam complex that runs across this way. So our June sites are looking like this, and then our August sites are looking like this. So you can see the same tree in the background with our Beaver Dam, just right there. But ideally what we want to do is change our August 2015 sites from looking like this back to what our June sites would look like. So that increase in water table and the water storage will be really important in doing that. And then thank you, and if you have any questions,